Despite the huge allocations and loans to the 36 states in Nigeria, unemployment is at an all-time high with 53% youth and 31.79% inflation, a combination of the highest misery index we've had in over 2 decades. The impact of corruption on the various states with a high level of foreign or local loans, as recently published by the Debt Management Office, says it all that the states are not delivering their dividends of democracy to their people. The overdependence on Federation Account Allocation Committee (FAC), with little or no emphasis in internally generated revenue in the states, seems to constitute the major inability of states to pay their workers. Meanwhile, it is alleged that the federal government may likely take over salary payment from the state governors and rename all Nigerian workers as Nigerian civil servants. Therefore, both state, local government, and federal government should be using IPs. This will allow the governors to use their monthly allocation for state development. Joining us now is Kenny Okolugbo, former Commissioner for Delta State Oil Producing Area Development Commission, the SOPADEC. Good morning and welcome to the morning show, Mr. Okolugbo.
Thank you for having me. Good morning.
Well, Mr. Okolugbo, thank you for joining us. You listened to Ayo. She was saying that there is a proposal on the table for the federal government to take over the payment of salaries in the states because these states cannot pay salaries. In the federal system, although we run more or less an aberration, should the federal government pay salaries in the states? And do you think these states are viable?
Well, okay, if you look at the analysis that was actually done, it was said that 11 states can only pay salaries without the federal government allocation account. These states, when you look at the states that were named, Lagos, Ogun, I think Oshun, Kaduna, which I doubt now from that report, from what the governor said. You're looking at Imo, Enugu, Anambra, Kwara, Zamfara. It will be shocking to learn that if there was no FAAC, as it were, these states will not be able to pay their salaries. So 24 states as it is cannot pay salaries without the allocation coming from the federal government. Now, if you look at the inflation rate in Nigeria, we are talking about 31.7%. That has been an all-time high in 2 decades. This inflation rate is not only being experienced, or it's not as a result of the federal government policies. The state policies have also contributed a lot to this inflation rate because the wage award that was agreed between the federal government and the state government was 35,000 naira. Now, out of that 35,000 naira, you find that less than 5%, in fact, just about 95% of the states have not paid that wage award. And that wage award was agreed because of the removal of subsidy. And you know, when you put money in the pockets of the people, you reflect the economy. And the economy can be reflected when you put money in the pockets of the people. When you have those workers who are experiencing so much hardship because of the increase, especially consumer price index, when you go to the market, you're looking at a bag of rice for almost 50,000 naira, half bag of rice. You're looking at tomatoes, you're looking at other various items. And you have not paid them this wage award that has been agreed by the federal government. It's not far-fetched when you now say that the federal government should take over the salaries of workers in the state. Well, I wouldn't support that because we're talking about decentralization and making the federal government weaker because it is too strong. But the states have not given the federal government a reason to be happy about not keeping to this agreement. I think if you check, it's only Rivers State as it is, and Lagos State most likely have been paying this wage increase since they agreed to this increment. And so it is a sad story that 24 states or 25 states thereabout cannot actually pay salaries without federal allocation.
All right. And rightly said, in terms of it's a big indictment as a state, and that's why some people have said that perhaps to evaluate the viability of some states, if they are able to stand as states in themselves. Let me ask around this this concern around some states' inability to generate internal revenue internally and depend on FAC allocation. Is this a healthy way to run a government? And then how can we begin to hold governors accountable to ensure that they're able to implement plans, policies to shore up their internally generated revenue?
Certainly. When you talk of IGRO, for example, at the last MBS report, Lagos State government generates about 651 billion. And the next to Lagos State government is Rivers State, which is 172 billion. And after then, you have the FCT, which is 124 billion. Before you have Ogun, which is 120 billion. And then my state, Delta, which is about 85 billion. Now, if you look at it from a critical perspective, Kaduna, for example, says, El-Rufai said he raised internally generated revenue from 11 billion to 58 billion. And so Kaduna is supposed to be self-sufficient in terms of paying salaries. And that was why it was listed. But you see when Uba Sani came, the governor, and said Kaduna is owing $587 million, 85 billion naira, and has a contractual obligation of 115 billion. And at the Card Invest, I am using Kaduna as a case study. I was also using my state, Delta. El-Rufai said he had attracted about $4.4 billion. And that the Kawo Bridge, the Murtala Mohammed Road Square, and others had all benefited from these loans that have been collected. While Uba Sani didn't say he misappropriated the funds, he cried out and said, out of the 10 billion, 7.2 billion is deducted as source, and he's left with only 3.2 billion. And so he cannot pay salaries if he doesn't have to borrow. Even though the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics have said that he has borrowed about $17.7 million, and some also in Naira, but he has asserted that he hasn't borrowed. Just like the same thing they said about Cross River State Governor, that he borrowed $16.5 billion and $57 million, and he has also said he has not borrowed since he became the governor. But there is this statistics that was also released that said 266 billion has been borrowed by 13 governors in the last year, and had been increased to about 509 billion from 16 states. Maybe we need to do a forensic examination of what the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics is churning out. But if you had to take it from that perspective, the state governments are not prioritizing. For example, if you take my state, Delta, for example, the last administration, there were certain funds that could have been committed into showing up projects that could have impacted on the people. They call it federal roads. I don't agree when you say roads are federal, because roads are very critical. For example, if you use IGRO, if you are receiving 85 billion, take the Agbo-Amukpe stretch, for example, that has been in a very critical state. It is, it's a sorry state now. They did a lot of remedial work, running into hundreds of millions, which to me was more like a conduit pipe. Now the road is unpassable. You have bequeathed that on the new administration. Now, if you say it's a federal road and you commit so much funds in building a federal project like the Federal Road Safety School, that's a misplaced priority. And instead of you investing on that road, on that critical infrastructure, because the Federal Road Safety School you've built, you're not going to get refund for it. That would have been a critical priority that you could have dedicated this IGRO into. And instead of now having to take a loan, like it was taken to buy shares, for example, I'm just using it just like I use Kaduna, on the project that we know, the FLNG, which is laudable, because if you look at the floating liquefied natural gas, we're talking about carbon emission, gas emission, not coming into the zones. But you don't go into a futuristic investment that you took a 21% interest-paying loan for almost 3 years now. You've given standard irrevocable payment orders for monies to be taken from your account, and the states cannot see the benefit of those futuristic investments. And by the time it was signed, it came to 8%, no more than 3%, which was the 20 billion that was taken from Fidelity Bank. So such investments are misplaced priorities, which is what we are talking about. These things cannot show up the economy of a state, for example. If you look at the, if you take it by what the new governor has done, the Serendip Capital, for example, which he has signed an agreement with, which is now going to have carbon credits and create jobs, they are already carrying out a feasibility studies. He didn't commit to taking a loan of 20 billion. The 20 billion loan we talked about is a 3%. These 3% of the shares. Now they say it's 8%. So I don't even know where maybe the 5% was done on private placements. That is not very clear now. But these are the things that people cry about when they say that the states should be held accountable. I know on these issues, last time, the other statesman, Reverend Papa Clark, complained a lot about how it was misplaced priorities for the derivation funds to have been used for other purposes other than what it was meant for, and the return of 240 billion, which Rivers State said they committed to the building of flyovers. The Delta State government took 100 billion and didn't use it for the derivation area. So that's the same thing Kaduna too. People have complained about Kaduna. But if you look at it, in Yobe, for example, Yobe is generating only 9 billion in IGR. That means it doesn't even get up to 1 billion naira in a month. Bayelsa is generating 15 billion and getting 22 billion as FAC. And Bayelsa is not even, it's a shame that Bayelsa cannot even pay the 35% of the wage award, because look at the population of Bayelsa. If you are generating 15 billion, which to me is quite lazy for the state government, but at least you're getting 22 billion, which is more than what you generate in a whole year in your IGR. You should be able to pay 35% wage award. And so when the labor unions are kicking and saying that they want to go on strike, people concentrate more on the federal government instead of the state governments, which are not playing their roles as they are supposed to play. Now, take another example. The Delta State government, the new governor gave Julius Berger a contract for 78 billion. He was able to pay 19 billion without borrowing, and has said that in the next 30 months, he'll be able to pay the remaining funds, which would give about 3 flyovers and other roads. These are the kind of investments you do that people want to see, that you are investing these borrowed funds into, and they can see the impact. For example, that stretch of road I talked about, which will not cost more than 80 billion, if he takes the bold step to also borrow, even if it means borrowing, to pay from the Amukpe stretch to the Agbo stretch, that would open up an entire economic front in that whole region. In fact, I'm directly affected because I have an investment which I could have put in either Lagos or in Abuja, in my village called Obiaruku, and I have put in so much money in that investment, but the investment cannot move on because of the road. The shopping mall I had completed since 2017, and I can only just talk of the flats that are there. So these are places that could have employed up to 400-500 people. But I'm sure if that road is not done in another 2-3 months, I'm using that example, those who know it, I will have to shut down that business. So this does not encourage local direct investment or foreign direct investment when you have this misplaced priorities. So sometimes it's not even about just even misappropriation or diversion of funds. It's about knowing when you don't put your priorities right, just like you say in economy, scale of preference and opportunity cost. So these are the things that the state governments should be held. Look at Oyo, for example. When Umahi visited Oyo, the state governor complained and said he's been doing a lot of federal rules. Umahi assured him that, look, when the economy becomes better, he could talk of refund. But for now, he cannot talk of refund. But when you look at Third Mainland, for example, and look at what has just been done on Third Mainland, that will tell you that if you put the right people and those who can drive an industry,
can you hear me?
You can get the results. But if you also look...
Hello?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes, please. It's important that when we try to interject, you try to pause, because this is supposed to be a conversation, not... No,
I didn't hear you. I'm just hearing...
Yes, okay.
I'm just hearing you now.
Okay, please try and listen carefully so that when I ask you a question, you just pause and let us make progress with the conversation. Now, I asked you earlier on that, do you think that the states are viable? Because some people argue that the military just created these states for political reasons, for reasons other than viability. But some other people also argue that there's no state that is not viable. After all, in every state there are mineral resources and all of that. The IGR that you talked about, that IGR oftentimes is from taxation. So they collect the IGR, they go to Abuja to collect money. And yet in many of the states, even the ones that appear capable of paying salaries, the debt overhang is heavy, both local debt and foreign debt, as the DMO, Department of the Debt Management Office disclosed recently. Where do you think the problem is? Is it poor leadership, poor governance, or the fact that the states are not viable and maybe some states should be scrapped?
Okay, it's not about saying the states are not viable. I believe the states are viable. They are lazy, some of these states. They are the heavy dependence on the Federal Allocation Accounts Committee that comes every month has made them not look for alternative sources. For example, if you look at the statistics I gave earlier as regards generation of revenue from these states, the states do generate revenues from certain areas like Lagos. Okay, well, like you said, is mostly taxation. But you also know that certain legislation must have to also be done to allow the states to become more viable. For example, areas are on the exclusive list. Electricity has been removed from the exclusive list. But funny enough, gas has not been removed from the exclusive list. So if you remove electricity from the exclusive list and you have not removed gas, how do you generate gas now to help the states who are going to go on electricity? For example, in my area where I come from, Okpai, they generate a lot of gas. So if you go and establish an electricity company like they have there, which generates 481 megawatts, which should also help in generating revenue for the state, we complain that it has not been stepped down, for example. These states, this company cannot get gas except it has to resort back to the federal government. So I know legislation has also affected the states in terms of generating funds. But the states can also take advantage of the ones that they have. Like, for example, Kaduna is said to have iron ore, it's scarce to have gold. Zamfara, we know, has gold, but these are also all under exclusive legislative list. So if they can decide to start looking at those, coal, for example, is in Enugu, and bitumen is in Ondo, and cocoa is in Ondo. So if you can take example, just like I talked about Delta that signed that agreement over reclaiming the mangrove forest, you can now generate your internal revenue and you become less dependent on FAC. But it might not only be FAC, the other areas too you can resort to also question. For example, you have interrogated your Jokuta project here, and I must give you credit. $496 million was paid out to a company that Yaradua had stripped of the ownership of Ajokuta, and had said that company only stripped the assets of Ajokuta and gave it out to and used it to collect loans. And you find a government after Yaradua paying them $496 million. I'm happy that the Senate is probing that payment now. For example, these funds are funds that also affect, because this $496 million that was paid out was not only generated by the federal government, they also generated from the states. So there are so many loopholes that you can actually look at, which can also help the states shore up their revenue. But these questions and these issues have to be interrogated very deeply so that Nigerians can know that it is not only about the federal government, which of course we know the federal government has a huge responsibility, but the states have a whole lot to do in terms of generating funds to contribute to the FAC.
All right, from 2023 statistics, the top or the least performing states in terms of top 10 in that regard, Benue State has 15.9 billion. You talked about Bayelsa with also 15.9 billion. But I see the states listed, Adamawa and some of these states, as states that, despite the best intentions, there are bigger issues that have plagued the ability of these states to generate income, one of which is insecurity. If you look at Benue, for instance, the state of insecurity has provided that farmers are unable to go to their farms. Investors are unlikely to come into that kind of environment. So would you say that there's some issues beyond the governor? At least security is not the responsibility. Unfortunately, it does not come under one of the remits of the governor. That is at federal level. Would you say that there's some instances where these state governors are excused because of certain conditions that are almost beyond their control?
Oh yes, you can't take away insecurity. For example, from what you said, Yobe is actually the least. Yobe is 9 billion, and Kebbi is 9 billion.
Kebbi is 9.1
Yobe
billion.
and Taraba
Yeah.
is 10 billion.
Yeah.
Yes, it's the least. And but you can't take away insecurity because Benue used to be the food basket of Nigeria, and today is no more the food basket of Nigeria because we can see the killings that have been going on. The federal government cannot shy away from the fact that we still have a whole lot of challenge in terms of insecurity. And so the header farmers clashes have greatly impacted on our ability to produce from these areas. That is why I did not blame some of those states when I tried to blame Bielsa. That I was trying to look at those states that insecurity has not affected. Those areas like even Plateau, for example, Plateau is 15 billion also, have been heavily impacted by the insecurity. So the federal government must have to do a lot in terms of insecurity for these states to be able to shop their revenue. If you do not have a stable or peace, if you don't have peace or a stable environment, you cannot provide investment drive in these areas. But be as it is, if you remove insecurity, these states too cannot shy away from the fact that they can at least pay the 35,000 wage award because their funds have increased. For example, my state gets 38.1 billion as at the last FAC. Rivers got 28 billion. Kano got 13 billion. Even Plateau, Kaduna got 7 billion. Akwa Ibom got 26 billion. I already said that Bayelsa got 22 billion. So Anambra got about 10 billion. So because their revenues have increased from this FAC account, at least let them first of all pay these wage awards so that we can know that they are dealing with other issues. They did not expect this increment. If this increment didn't come, they would still have had to pay their wages. But I must commend the Benue State governor who was able to remove a lot of ghost workers. It is sad that even with NIN and Beavers, we still talk of ghost workers in this state. The amount of ghost workers that were eliminated from the payroll was shocking in Benue State. So if some of these states are still experiencing such huge amounts going off in terms of payment, then they should be able to also check their ghost workers, which will enable them to show up their revenue in terms of funds that they can allocate on this issue of the wage award. Because times are really hard. I can't imagine it. You just finished speaking to the minister. One of the areas I thought you did not even touch was the amounts that we pay on local flights. My flight to Abuja was 163,000. When I was leaving, it was 163,000, just premium economy. I'm not even talking of business class that I used to buy, which is about 250,000 naira. We need to also look at the inflation having a direct impact on all these areas. How can an average worker buy a ticket of maybe 163,000 or maybe 110,000 for an economy flight? He will have to save about 6 months to be able to come to Abuja. But if you decide to say you want to come by road, the insecurity measures are also there. So I think, fair enough, we must also look at all these things from a holistic point of view. There are issues that have also hindered the states. But I don't think with the increase in the allocation, there should be an excuse why they should not at least pay this wage award. This wage award matters a lot because people are suffering.
Well, Mr. Okolugbo, if you can hear me, I get the point you have made about...
I can hear you.
The point you have made about legislation, about removing ghost workers, about security and all of that. But in what other ways can we turn our states into centers of productivity rather than consumption? National cake collectors, in what other ways? Now, secondly, SERAP, the socio-economic responsibility and accountability project, SERAP, has given an ultimatum to the state governments to disclose what they did with the monies they collected, the loans they collected, and if not, they should submit themselves to the scrutiny of EFCC and ICPC. What do you think of that? Do you think that they also have an obligation to constantly explain to us how they spent the loans they collected, the support they got from the federal government, and even the monthly FAC allocations?
Oh, it's very important. It's very important that they have that obligation. For example, Edo State is said to have moved from $264 million to $314 million in terms of external loans. I was shocked to find out that Bauchi is also among those that are said to have taken external loans to the tune of $187 million. Anambra is also on that schedule. So it's not only Kaduna that we're talking about that has taken external loans to $587 million. So if you look at it, the states are supposed to do exactly what Governor Obasani has done. I think it's highly commendable because he has been able to give us an idea of what he has met on ground. But you find out that in some cases, some of these state governors might not want to rock the boat because they do not want to make their predecessors uncomfortable. But at the end of the day, the buck stops at their table. So they will need to let us know exactly, which is what Serap is saying, that open up, let us know where we are coming from. Let us know what your challenges are. Because if you don't open up, we won't know exactly what has happened. I think what the Kaduna State governor did was was more like a tonic for Serap to do what they have done. And if the states can actually do this, then one can know where we are coming from. Because there are so many irrevocable standing payment orders that by the time it comes, you find out that most states barely pay their salaries. And you have to go on infrastructural development. Appropriation, for example, is a law. I'll give an example. I have a forum, Ndokwa Advancement Forum, where we belong to, and we're so bothered about what is happening in Deso Padek. And we're told that, for example, there'll be no budget there because of what has happened in the previous government. They've not been able to put their acts together. And I failed to believe it, but when I saw that the House of Assembly members were part of the forum did not react, I found out that they are not able to spend. So if you don't have a budget, for example, for such a critical intervention agency, how do you now come in at this point in time? Because what you're supposed to do is to help when the states have shortfall. That is what 13% derivation is supposed to be all about. For example, in the last allocation, 87 billion went on derivation to the states who are supposed to get 13%. So these are all the things that they are supposed to cry out. And people will now know that this is exactly the situation we find ourselves. And so when we are asking questions like, why is this not happening, then we can know who to hold. So I don't think Serap is on the wrong track in terms of what they are doing. But they should not be vindictive about it. They should be able to deal with the states because all the states have their peculiar issue.
Yeah, but I asked you, is there a role for us, the people, in making sure that these states become centers of productivity? Because at the moment, they are just centers of consumption and flamboyance, conspicuous consumption on the part of the persons who are...
That's exactly what it is. Now, the hope they can have is to, first of all, reorganize their priority. You must have to bring professionals on board. You cannot continue to give out political appointments and sacrifice professionalism on the altar of political expediency. If you're able to bring in professionals who can give you those advice, the right investments to make and the right areas to open up, you can then you can cut your coat according to your cloth, and then you can now make yourself less center of production, consumption and more of production. It's like when this, for example, when there was an increment when subsidy was removed, on my Twitter handle at Kenny Okolugbo, people laughed at me when I said I was not going to drive my G-Wagon. That was sometime in August. And I never did because it's a guzzler. I can't afford to be paying 100,000 naira to fuel or 80,000 naira to fuel my car and be taking it around. And I have not done that since I left it, and I have not missed it. So there are certain areas we can all sacrifice. Do you understand me? The states must also look at it from that perspective. Like, what am I doing? What are the excessive things I am doing that I can stop and reinvest? For example, I've talked about roads. I've talked about schools. I've not even dwelt on schools. Education is very key. And so by the time you invest on education, you invest on roads, you make these critical sectors, which are productive sectors, grow, rather than just looking at going from bottom to top approach, sitting down in the comfort zone and creating a budget. Come from bottom to top approach. That was what my former governor always preached to do when we were in government. So that you can know what the people want, and you can know how to impact on them when you bring out those projects.
All right, a final question before we let you go this morning, just to take a question further on the debt profile, especially of the states that are largely dependent on FAC allocations. You know, we talked about Bayelsa. Bayelsa has a debt profile of a domestic debt profile of over 155 million naira. And so when you look at things like that, you wonder how these approval for
No,
loans...
it's billion.
Billion.
It's billion.
Billion. How these approval for loans were processed in the State House of Assembly. I'd like you to share with us the role of State House of Assemblies when it comes to curtailing the debt appetite of some of these subnationals.
Yes, that is why they say the State House of Assembly should stop being a rubber stamp. They gave them an opportunity to be self-independent. Most of them voted against it. If the State House of Assembly are supposed to live overboard, it doesn't mean that you must challenge or you must be disloyal. To me, loyalty is when you can look at your boss in the face and tell him that, look, what you're doing is not right. You don't have to come in public and disagree with him, but tell him as it is. If the State House of Assemblies are putting their check and balance, these loans will not have been incurred the way they were incurred. For example, you don't take a foreign loan without approval from the National Assembly. That's why you saw that there was a running battle between Shehu Sani and El Rufai because he refused to approve some of those loans. At the end of the day, those are the loans that are coming back to haunt the new government that has come on board. So approval mechanism must be very strict. And we must also have the Houses of Assembly realize that with what is happening in Nigeria now, it cannot be business as usual. You must be able to interface with the executive to be able to agree that whatever loans they are taking is tied to certain projects that can impact on the people and not one that can just be a conduit pipe that would have no impact on the people. That way, there will be a synergy, just like what you're having in the National Assembly now and the executive. I think the 10th National Assembly has been able to, without being confrontational, has been able to have that relationship. For example, the 30 trillion that they are probing in the last administration, most people won't have thought that because it's an APC-dominated house and it's an APC government, they won't have expected that they will carry out such a probe. That is the cue that the state governments should also take, especially the Houses of Assembly, with what the National Assembly is doing here.
All right, well, thank you very much, Mr. Kenny Okolugbo, for your time with us this morning, discussing just how much states must begin to generate their own income and reduce their dependence on FAC allocation. Thank you.